The elevator doors slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss, revealing the pristine sanctuary of the penthouse that overlooked the sprawling, rain-slicked grid of Manhattan. Daniel Brooks stepped into the foyer, the heels of his bespoke Italian leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the imported marble floor. It was a sound he enjoyed, sharp and authoritative, echoing like a metronome in the vast, curated silence of his home. Usually, at this hour, the air would be filled with the soft, chaotic hum of domestic life, the clatter of porcelain from the kitchen, the muffled giggles of 6-year-old Leo and 4-year-old Maya, or the melodic, if slightly distracted, voice of his wife, Olivia, taking a call from her editor. But tonight, the silence was absolute. It was the heavy, sterile silence of an operating theater before the first incision. Daniel loosened his silk tie, his movements precise and practiced. He was a man who spent his life inside the human chest cavity, stitching together the delicate machinery of life, and he had developed an almost supernatural sensitivity to rhythms that were out of sync. Something here was wrong. The ambient lighting was set to the correct evening hue. The gladiolus in the crystal vase were fresh, yet the atmosphere felt hollowed out, as if the oxygen had been chemically extracted from the room. He walked into the living area, his gaze sweeping over the minimalist furniture that Olivia had selected with such agonizing care. On the white marble kitchen island, a singular object disrupted the perfection, a folded piece of cream-colored stationery. It sat there with the weight of a tombstone. Daniel did not rush. He did not run. He walked to the counter, placed his briefcase down with a gentle thud, and picked up the paper. He recognized the scent before he recognized the handwriting. Jo Malone, basil and mandarin, a scent he had bought for her. The note was brief. Olivia was an editor. After all, she knew how to cut the fat and leave only the bone. Daniel, I cannot do this anymore. I am suffocating. I have found someone who makes me feel alive, someone who sees the woman beneath the wife. Do not look for me. Tell the children I am sorry, but I had to choose myself. Olivia. For a long moment, Daniel simply stood there. A normal man might have crumpled the paper, screamed, or thrown the vase of flowers against the wall. Daniel Brooks did not do those things. He checked his own pulse. It remained steady, a slow 60 beats per minute. He felt a cold, metallic sensation spreading through his chest, not of heartbreak, but of deep, stinging insult. It was the feeling of a surgeon discovering that a subordinate had dropped a sterile instrument on the floor. It was an error. It was messy, and Daniel Brooks despised mess. He walked calmly down the hallway to the master bedroom. The door was ajar. Inside, the walk-in closet told a more violent story than the note. Her side was decimated. The designer gowns, the rows of shoes, the jewelry he had draped around her neck at galas like shackles of gold, they were gone. She had not just left, she had evacuated. He turned on the television mounted on the wall, switching it to the local news, almost instinctively knowing that a woman like Olivia, a public figure in the fashion world, would not leave quietly. The world was too hungry for the fall of the perfect couple. And there it was. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, Fashion Editor Olivia Brooks spotted with disgraced journalist. The image on the screen was grainy, taken with a long-lens camera, but it was undeniable. It showed Olivia, his Olivia, looking disheveled in a trench coat, rushing into a motel on the outskirts of the city. She was not alone. A man was shielding her from the rain, Ryan Mitchell. Daniel knew the name. A rough, unpolished freelancer who wrote hit pieces on corporations. A man who wore flannel and drove a rusted truck. A man who was everything Daniel was not. The juxtaposition was grotesque. The elegant, poised wife of the city's most respected cardiothoracic surgeon, running away with a man who looked like he smelled of stale tobacco and cheap bourbon. Daddy, the small, trembling voice came from the doorway. Daniel turned slowly, his face instantly rearranging itself into a mask of tragic paternal concern. Leo was standing there, holding a stuffed dinosaur by the tail, his eyes wide and confused. "Where is Mommy?" the boy asked. "Nanny said she went on a trip, but her closet is empty." Daniel walked over and knelt on one knee, bringing himself to eye level with his son. He reached out and smoothed Leo's hair, his touch gentle but firm. This was the moment. The narrative had to be set now, like setting a broken bone so it would heal in the shape he desired. Leo, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a prayer. Mommy has gone away for a long time. Is she coming back for dinner? Leo asked, hope fragile in his voice. No, son, Daniel said, allowing a single, perfect expression of pain to cross his features. Mommy decided that she wanted to be with a new friend instead of us. She chose to leave. He saw the crack in his son's eyes, the moment the world fractured. It was cruel, necessary work. He pulled Leo into a hug, staring over the boy's shoulder at the dark window. He was inoculating the children against her. By the time Olivia tried to return, and he knew she would eventually try to crawl back, these children would view her not as their mother, but as the woman who abandoned them for a stranger. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the nanny had been dismissed with a tearful, bonus-heavy paycheck to ensure her loyalty, Daniel stood in the master bathroom. He turned on the faucet, letting the water run until it was steaming hot. He picked up a bar of harsh, antibacterial soap and began to wash his hands. He scrubbed them systematically, focusing on the spaces between his fingers, under his nails, up to his wrists. He looked at himself in the mirror. He did not look like a man whose life had just imploded. He looked focused. Olivia thought she had escaped him. She thought she had run into the arms of a lover. She did not understand that she had merely moved from the recovery room to the operating table. She had made herself the villain of the story, handing him the ultimate weapon, public sympathy. He dried his hands on a plush white towel and picked up his phone. He dialed the number of his family attorney. It is done, Daniel said, his voice void of any emotion. She has left. Start the filing. I want full custody. I want her accounts frozen by morning. And release a statement to the press. Keep it dignified. Say that Dr. Brooks is devastated and asks for privacy while he protects his children from this unfortunate betrayal. He hung up and walked back out to the living room. The note still sat on the counter. He picked it up one last time, reading the line I chose myself. He smiled, a cold, thin curving of his lips that never reached his eyes. You chose war, Olivia, he whispered to the empty room. And you have no idea who you are fighting. 3 months had passed since the night the silence descended upon the penthouse, and in that time, Daniel Brooks had perfected the art of the victim. The autumn winds had stripped the trees in Central Park of their leaves, leaving the branches bare and skeletal against the gray sky, mirroring the narrative Daniel had carefully cultivated for the public. He was the sturdy trunk standing firm while the storm of his wife's betrayal stripped away the beauty of his life. The morning routine had become a military operation of aggressive wholesomeness. Daniel stood in the kitchen at 6 in the morning, the aroma of freshly ground coffee and caramelized oats filling the air. He was already dressed in his surgical scrubs, the blue fabric crisp and unwrinkled, signaling to the world that he was a man who saved lives even while his own was falling apart. Maya, hold still, Daniel said softly, his fingers working dexterously through his daughter's fine, blonde hair. Maya sat on the high stool, swinging her legs, her eyes fixed on the tablet screen playing cartoons. She looked so much like Olivia that it sometimes caused a muscle in Daniel's jaw to twitch involuntarily. Mommy used to do a French braid, Maya whispered, not looking up. I know, sweetie, Daniel replied, his voice dripping with a practiced melancholia. But Mommy is very busy with her new friend. She does not have time for braids anymore. So Daddy learned how to do it from a YouTube video. For you. He pulled the strands tight, just a fraction too tight. Maya flinched slightly, bringing her hand up to her scalp. Does that hurt? He asked, pausing. A little, she admitted. We have to make it tight so it stays, Daniel said, tying the navy blue ribbon with surgical precision. If we are loose, things fall apart. And we do not want things to fall apart again, do we? No, Daddy, she murmured. He kissed the top of her head, a gesture that would have looked tender to any observer, but felt possessive, like a stamp of ownership. He was rewriting their memories, overlaying Olivia's maternal warmth with his own narrative of abandonment. Every missed phone call from Olivia, calls he had blocked on the children's iPads, became proof of her indifference. Every night she wasn't there to tuck them in became evidence of her selfishness. Later that morning, at the gates of the private preparatory school on the Upper East Side, Daniel played his role to perfection. The other mothers, women who had once sipped champagne with Olivia at fashion weeks, now swarmed around Daniel like moths to a tragic flame. They touched his arm sympathetically. They offered casseroles and playdates. They looked at him with eyes that held a mixture of pity and awakened desire. "I do not know how you do it, Daniel," one of the mothers sighed, clutching her latte. "Saving hearts all day and raising 2 kids alone? You are a saint. Truly." Daniel offered a wan, humble smile, looking down at his shoes. "I just do what has to be done. The children are resilient. We are managing. I just wish." He trailed off, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. "Wish what?" she pressed. "I just wish she would call them." Daniel lied effortlessly. "Even just once. They ask about her every night, and I am running out of excuses for why their mother does not want to speak to them." A collective gasp of indignation rippled through the group. The seed was planted. Olivia was not just an adulterer. She was a monster. But miles away, across the bridge and deep into the gritty, industrial sprawl of Queens, the monster was currently staring at a cracked ceiling tile in a 4th-floor walk-up apartment that smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke. Olivia Carter sat on the edge of a sagging mattress, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket. The woman who had once dictated the seasonal trends of New York fashion was unrecognizable. Her hair, usually a glossy curtain of silk, was pulled back in a messy, fraying bun. Her skin was pale, devoid of the expensive creams and serums that used to line her vanity. She looked hollowed out, as if the grief had eaten the flesh from her bones. The apartment was a claustrophobic cage. The windows were covered with cheap blinds that were permanently drawn to keep out the prying lenses of the paparazzi, who still occasionally circled like vultures, hoping for a shot of the fallen woman. Ryan Mitchell sat at a rickety wooden table in the corner, illuminated by the harsh blue glow of 3 different monitors. He was not the passionate lover the tabloids painted him to be. He looked exhausted. His flannel shirt was stained with coffee, and his eyes were rimmed with red. The air between them was not charged with sexual tension. It was thick with the anxiety of fugitives sharing a foxhole. "Stop pacing, Olivia," Ryan said, his voice rough with fatigue, not looking away from his screen. "You are making me nervous." "I missed Maya's ballet recital today," Olivia said, her voice cracking. She stopped pacing and leaned against the peeling wallpaper, hugging her arms around her stomach as if physically holding herself together. "It is the first one I have ever missed. Daniel will be there. He will be holding her flowers. He will look at the other parents with those sad, puppy dog eyes, and they will think he is a hero." Ryan stopped typing. He spun his chair around, the metal squeaking in the quiet room. He looked at her not with pity, but with a hard, grounding intensity. "And if you were there?" Ryan asked. "If you were there, he would be the perfect husband. He would be smiling, holding your hand, and whispering in your ear that if you ever try to leave him, he would ensure you were committed to a psychiatric ward. Do you remember that, Olivia? Do you remember the pills he tried to force-feed you?" Olivia squeezed her eyes shut, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. The coldness of Daniel's hands. The syringe he brought home from the hospital to help her nerves. The way he gaslighted her until she questioned her own sanity. "I remember," she whispered. "Then remember why we are doing this," Ryan said, standing up and walking over to her. He did not touch her intimately. He placed his hands on her shoulders like a coach speaking to a boxer in the final round. "We have to let him win the battle of public opinion so we can win the war in court. We need him to feel safe. We need him to feel so arrogant, so untouchable, that he makes a mistake." "He does not make mistakes, Ryan," Olivia said, opening her eyes. "He is a surgeon. He is precise." "Everyone makes mistakes when they think no one is watching," Ryan countered. "I am tracking his encrypted emails. He is getting sloppy. He moved a significant amount of money to an offshore account yesterday. He thinks you are too busy sleeping with me to notice his finances. He thinks I am just a dirtbag writer with no resources." Ryan gestured around the squalid apartment. This dump? The narrative that we are broke and desperate? It is a disguise, Olivia. It is the Trojan horse. Olivia looked at the man the world thought was her lover. There was no romance here, only a desperate, terrifying alliance. She walked over to the small window and peered through a crack in the blinds. Down on the street, life went on. People walked their dogs, bought groceries, lived normal lives. They had no idea that up here, a mother was breaking her own heart, piece by piece, day by day, deliberately letting her children hate her so that one day, she might be able to save them from the monster who tucked them in at night. I just hope, Olivia whispered, her breath fogging up the cold glass, that when this is over, they will forgive me. They will, Ryan said, returning to his computer. But first, we have to burn the witch. And you, my dear, are the witch. Olivia turned back to the room, her expression hardening. The tears dried up, replaced by a cold resolve that mirrored the steel in her husband's eyes. Then let them burn me, she said. But I will take him down with the ashes. The November wind cut through the streets of the Upper East Side like a serrated knife, carrying with it the biting promise of a harsh winter. Olivia Carter stood across the street from the St. Jude's Preparatory School, her collar turned up against the chill, her face obscured by oversized sunglasses that hid the dark circles carving hollows beneath her eyes. To the casual observer, she might have looked like any other wealthy mother waiting for the afternoon dismissal, perhaps a little too thin, a little too rigid, but to the tight-knit community of parents gathering by the wrought iron gates, she was a pariah. She was a contagion they feared would infect their perfect lives. She had not seen Leo or Maya in 3 weeks. The legal injunctions Daniel had filed were thick, heavy documents filled with words like psychological instability and moral endangerment, effectively building a fortress around her children that was harder to breach than the brick walls of the school itself. But the hunger to see them, just to glimpse the red backpack Maya insisted on wearing or the way Leo scuffed his shoes when he was tired, had become a physical ache in her chest, a dull, throbbing void that made breathing difficult. The heavy oak doors of the school swung open, and the chaotic, joyous sound of children released from confinement spilled onto the sidewalk. Olivia stepped forward instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She scanned the sea of uniforms, searching for the 2 faces that anchored her to the earth. There they were. Leo was holding Maya's hand, leading her down the stone steps. They looked immaculate. Their coats were buttoned to the chin, their hair brushed to a shine. They looked like advertisements for well-cared-for children. But then Olivia saw it, the subtle slump in Leo's shoulders, the way Maya was not skipping but trudging. They looked well cared for, yes, but they did not look happy. Leo? Maya? The words tore from her throat before she could stop them. It was a mistake. She knew it instantly. Leo stopped. He looked up, searching for the voice. When his eyes locked onto hers across the street, his expression did not light up with recognition or joy. It crumpled into confusion and fear. He had been told Mommy was sick. He had been told Mommy chose a new life. Seeing her here, looking like a ghost in a trench coat, shattered the careful reality his father had constructed. Before Olivia could take a step off the curb, a wall of black wool blocked her view. 2 private security guards, hired by the school but undoubtedly paid for by Daniel's paranoia, stepped in front of her. Miss Carter, the taller one said, his voice flat and devoid of sympathy. You are not permitted within 500 feet of the children. You know the court order. I just want to say hello, Olivia pleaded, her voice trembling. I am their mother. Please, just 1 second. You need to leave, ma'am. Now, or we will call the police. Dr. Brooks has been very clear. The mention of his name was like a whip crack. Dr. Brooks, the benevolent savior, the victim. Olivia tried to look around the guard, desperate for one last glimpse, but the crowd of parents had noticed the commotion. They formed a protective phalanx around the children, their gazes turning upon Olivia with a mixture of disgust and righteous fury. These were women she had once hosted for brunch, women who had complimented her taste in interior design. Now, they looked at her as if she were a disease. One woman, A high-ranking member of the PDA named Evelyn stepped out of the circle. She walked up to Olivia, her designer heels clicking sharply on the pavement. Evelyn did not shout. She did not scream. She simply looked Olivia up and down with a sneer of absolute contempt. "You have some nerve," Evelyn hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Leaving those angels for some dirty reporter and then showing up here to traumatize them again. You are garbage, Olivia. Absolute garbage." And then, with a shocking, casual cruelty, Evelyn spat. The glob of saliva landed on the lapel of Olivia's coat. It was warm and humiliating. The shock of it froze the air in Olivia's lungs. She stood there, trembling, as the other parents watched in silence, their eyes hard and unforgiving. No one defended her. In their eyes, she deserved this. She had violated the sacred contract of motherhood. Olivia did not wipe it off. She could not move. She looked past Evelyn, past the guards, and saw the back of a black SUV pulling away, Daniel's car. He had not even stepped out. He had simply watched from behind tinted glass as his wife was publicly executed, driving away with their children while she stood shivering on the pavement. The retreat to the apartment in Queens was a blur of nausea and shame. When Olivia finally unlocked the door with shaking hands, she collapsed against the entryway wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. The apartment was dark, illuminated only by the street lights filtering through the blinds and the blue glow of Ryan Mitchell's workspace. The hot affair the world imagined was, in reality, a monastic existence of shared misery and obsessive work. There was no candlelight, no silk sheets, no passionate embraces to numb the pain of the world outside. The air smelled of cold coffee and printer ink. Ryan did not look up immediately. He was on the phone, his voice hushed and urgent. "I understand the risk, but the source needs to be verified. Yes, tonight." He hung up and finally turned to look at the woman slumped by the door. He did not rush to comfort her with the tenderness of a lover. He approached her with the pragmatic concern of a comrade in the trenches. He saw the stain on her coat. He did not ask what happened. He knew the cruelty of the society they had left behind. "They saw you," Ryan asked, handing her a glass of water. "They hate me," Olivia whispered, staring at the floor. "They look at me and they see a monster. And the worst part is, Leo looked at me like I was a stranger. Daniel has erased me, Ryan. He is scrubbing me out of their memories like a stain on a shirt. He is filling the void with lies," Ryan said, sitting on the floor opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Lies have a shelf life, Olivia. The truth is permanent, but we have to survive long enough to tell it." He gestured to the wall behind him. It was covered in photographs, bank statements, and timelines connected by red string. A chaotic map of Daniel Brooks's corruption. It was not just the organ transplant list. It was money laundering through pharmaceutical shell companies. It was blackmail. "Look at this," Ryan said, his voice hardening. "We found the link to the judge handling your custody case. Daniel paid off his son's gambling debts 2 years ago. That is why the judge granted the restraining order so quickly. That is why you are losing." Olivia looked up at the wall. It was a masterpiece of deceit, and her husband was the architect. "It does not matter if we prove he is a criminal if I lose my children forever," she said, her voice breaking. "What if I am doing the wrong thing? What if I should have just stayed and let him kill me slowly? At least then I would be with them." "If you stayed," Ryan said, his eyes locking onto hers with intense seriousness, "he would have turned them into him. Do you want Leo to grow up to be a man who treats women like property? Do you want Maya to think love is submission? You are not fighting for custody, Olivia. You are fighting for their souls." Olivia stood up, her legs shaky but holding. She walked over to the small, rusted sink and wet a paper towel. She scrubbed the spit from her coat, scrubbing until the fabric frayed, scrubbing until her knuckles turned white. She walked into the bedroom, the one she slept in alone. On the nightstand, there was a framed photo of the kids, the glass cracked from when she had thrown it in a moment of despair during the first week. She picked it up. The world thought she was in this bedroom moaning the name of a lover. They imagined sweat and desire. But as Olivia curled up on the narrow bed, pulling the thin duvet up to her chin, The only sound in the room was the sound of a mother weeping, a low, guttural keen of agony that no lover could ever soothe. She was not a woman in love. She was a woman in exile, burning her own heart to keep a flicker of hope alive for the children who currently hated her. Outside, the city slept, indifferent to the truth. But in the penthouse overlooking the park, Daniel Brooks was awake, and soon he would realize that the woman he had discarded was not merely broken. She was becoming something dangerous. She was becoming a woman with nothing left to lose. The air in the cardiac wing of St. Jude's Medical Center was scrubbed of all scent, kept at a constant, chilly 68 degrees, a temperature designed to suppress bacterial growth and human comfort. For Daniel Brooks, however, this sterile atmosphere was more intoxicating than the freshest mountain air. This was his cathedral. Here, the messy, unpredictable variables of emotional life were suspended, replaced by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the binary certainty of life and death. Daniel walked down the corridor, his white coat billowing slightly behind him like the robes of a high priest. Nurses stepped aside, pressing themselves against the walls, lowering their eyes in a mixture of reverence and intimidation. He did not acknowledge them. He did not need to. His authority was not a thing that required constant reinforcement. It was as absolute as gravity. He felt invincible. In the months since Olivia's departure, his professional life had not suffered. In fact, it had flourished. Without the distraction of a wife who required emotional intimacy, a concept Daniel found as inefficient as a leaking valve, he had poured himself into his work with a terrifying focus. He entered his private office, a glass-walled sanctuary that offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The city looked like a circuit board from up here, a grid of lights and energy that he, in his own way, helped to power. He sat behind his mahogany desk, the leather chair groaning softly, and unlocked his computer. On the screen was the National Organ Transplant waiting list. It was a sacred document, a list that dictated who would receive the gift of life and who would quietly fade away. But to Daniel, it was merely a spreadsheet. He clicked on a file for a patient named Senator Harrison. The man was 62, a heavy drinker with a failing heart and a very deep pocket. Officially, the senator was number 47 on the list. He would likely die before a match was found. But the senator had also recently made a generic, anonymous donation to the hospital's new research wing, a donation large enough to build a small school. Daniel's finger hovered over the mouse. He did not feel guilt. Guilt was a symptom of a weak constitution. He felt only the pragmatic burden of necessity. The hospital needed funding. The senator needed a heart. It was a transaction. With a few keystrokes, Daniel accessed the back end of the database, a backdoor he had engineered years ago with the help of a desperate IT technician who had since been conveniently fired. He moved the senator to number 1. Status: critical. Priority: 1. He typed. He pressed enter. The screen refreshed. The lie was now truth. History had been rewritten. Somewhere in the city, a younger, perhaps more deserving patient had just been sentenced to death without ever knowing it. But Daniel did not think of that. He thought of the gala the senator would host in his honor. He thought of the power. He leaned back, interlacing his fingers behind his head. He was untouchable. He had excised the cancer from his personal life, Olivia, and he was the master of his professional domain. Olivia was likely rotting in some cheap apartment, regretting the moment she chose lust over stability. The thought gave him a warm, satisfied hum in his chest. And then, the computer chimed. It was a single, discordant note that cut through the silence of the office. A notification for a new email. Daniel frowned. His private email address was known only to a handful of people, senior board members, his attorney, and his broker. He clicked the tab. The sender was anonymous, a string of random alphanumeric characters that suggested a burner account. The subject line was empty. Curiosity piqued. Daniel opened it. There was no text in the body of the email. No threat. No demand for money. There was only a single attachment. Patient_record_402_archive. PDF. Daniel's breath hitched. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He knew that number. He did not need to open the file to know what it contained, but his hand moved the mouse involuntarily, clicking the file open. The screen filled with a scanned medical chart from 5 years ago. It was the record of a young woman, a teacher, who had died on his operating table. The official report, signed by Daniel himself, listed the cause of death as unforeseen aortic rupture due to pre-existing genetic weakness. It was a tragedy, the hospital had said. Unavoidable. But the document on the screen was not the official report. It was the raw, unedited surgical log. It showed the timestamp of the error, the moment Daniel, exhausted from a double shift and fueled by amphetamines he had prescribed himself, had nicked the artery. It showed the frantic, messy attempt to cauterize. It showed the negligence. This document was supposed to have been shredded. He had watched it burn in the incinerator himself. Or so he thought. Daniel stared at the screen, the blue light casting his face in a ghostly pallor. His heart, usually so steady, began to hammer against his ribs, a chaotic, erratic rhythm that he would have diagnosed as dangerous in a patient. Who? The question screamed in his mind. Who had this? He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city. The cars were tiny ants, the people invisible. Paranoia, cold and slippery, began to coil around his throat. It had to be a colleague. Dr. Evans had been eyeing the chief of surgery position for years. Evans was jealous, petty, the kind of man who would dig through trash to find dirt. Or perhaps it was the new hospital administrator, the woman with the sharp eyes who asked too many questions about the budget. His mind raced through a list of enemies, analyzing motives, calculating threats. He thought of everyone who could possibly want to hurt him. For a brief, fleeting second, the image of Olivia popped into his head. He saw her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound that echoed in the empty office. No, not Olivia. Olivia was a fashion editor. She worried about Pantone shades and hem lengths. She did not know how to encrypt emails. She did not know what a surgical log looked like, let alone how to interpret one. She was weak. She was currently playing house with that dirtbag journalist, probably drowning her sorrows in cheap wine and regretting her life choices. She was a broken woman, incapable of this level of sophisticated warfare. She was the one variable he did not need to worry about. Daniel turned back to the computer and deleted the email. It did not matter. It was a digital ghost. He would find the leak. He would find whoever sent this, and he would destroy them. He would ruin their career, burn their reputation, and leave them with nothing. He picked up his phone and dialed the head of hospital security. I want a full audit of the internal server access logs for the last 5 years, Daniel commanded, his voice steady again, the fear replaced by a cold, predatory aggression. And I want a sweep of my office for listening devices. Tonight. He hung up and walked over to the mirror hanging on the back of his door. He straightened his tie. He smoothed his hair. He looked into his own eyes and saw the predator staring back. You think you can hunt me? He whispered to the invisible enemy. I am the one who holds the knife. He did not know that across the city, in a room filled with shadows, the broken woman he had so easily dismissed was watching a progress bar on a computer screen reach 100%, her face illuminated not by regret, but by the cold, hard light of vengeance. He had made the fatal mistake of the narcissist. He believed he was the only one capable of wearing a mask. The memory of the night her marriage truly ended did not begin with a shout or the crash of broken glass. It began with the soft, almost imperceptible click of a safe door that had not been fully closed. It was 18 months ago, a Tuesday evening wrapped in the humid embrace of late summer. The penthouse was quiet, the children asleep in their wing, their breathing soft and rhythmic, unaware that the foundation of their world was about to fracture. Daniel was in the shower, the sound of the water thrumming through the pipes like a distant pulse. Olivia had gone into his study not to spy, but to retrieve her passport for an upcoming fashion week in Milan. She knelt by the wall safe hidden behind the heavy velvet drapes. Daniel was meticulous, a man who organized his life with the same rigidity he applied to the operating theater. But that night, exhaustion or arrogance had made him sloppy. The heavy steel door was ajar by a fraction of an inch. Olivia pulled it open. Inside, Nestled between stacks of bonds and velvet jewelry boxes was a black leather notebook. It was unassuming, the kind you could buy at any stationery store for a few dollars, but it felt heavy in her hand, vibrating with a silent, ominous weight. Curiosity, that fatal human flaw, made her open it. The pages were filled with Daniel's handwriting, tight, angular, precise. It was not a diary of thoughts, but a ledger of transactions. There were names she recognized from the news: wealthy tycoons, politicians, foreign dignitaries. Next to each name was a figure, often in the hundreds of thousands, and a medical status. Senator Harrison. Failing left ventricle. Priority status. Purchased. Amount, $1. 2M. Donor, 17-year-old male, motorcycle accident. Olivia's breath hitched. She flipped the pages, her eyes scanning the columns of cold, hard data. Waitlist bypassed. Blood type falsified. Organ redirected. This was not medicine. This was a market. Daniel was not just a surgeon. He was a broker of life and death, playing God for the highest bidder while deserving patients died waiting for phones that would never ring. Interesting reading material, isn't it? The voice came from the doorway, smooth and cool as polished marble. Olivia spun around, the book slipping from her trembling fingers and hitting the floor with a dull thud. Daniel stood there, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist, droplets of water glistening on his chest. He did not look angry. He did not look afraid. He looked at her with the mild, detached amusement of a scientist observing a lab rat that had navigated a maze unexpectedly. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely finding traction in her throat. "What is this? Tell me this is not what I think it is." He walked into the room, closing the door behind him with a gentle click. He moved to the small bar cart in the corner and poured himself a glass of sparkling water, adding a slice of lemon with practiced care. "It is exactly what you think it is, Olivia," he said, taking a sip. "It is the reason you wear diamonds. It is the reason the children go to private school. It is the cost of greatness. It is murder," she gasped, stepping back until her legs hit the edge of the desk. "You are stealing organs. You are letting people die. I have to call the police." She reached for her phone on the desk, but Daniel was faster. He did not run. He simply reached out and covered her hand with his. His skin was damp and cold. He didn't snatch the phone away. He just held her hand down, his grip firm, unyielding, crushing her fingers against the mahogany. "Think, Olivia," he said softly, leaning in close enough that she could smell the peppermint of his toothpaste mixed with the metallic scent of the shower. "Who will they believe? The chief of cardiothoracic surgery, a pillar of the community, a man who saves hundreds of lives a year? Or the neurotic, high-strung wife with a documented history of postpartum anxiety?" Olivia froze. "What? I have been documenting your episodes for years in my personal medical files," Daniel lied, his eyes boring into hers. "The mood swings, the paranoia, the nights you claimed you heard voices. I have prescriptions in your name that you never took, but the pharmacy records show I filled them for you. Valium, antipsychotics." "You are lying," she wept, tears finally spilling over. I am not crazy." "You are if I say you are," Daniel whispered, the monster finally shedding its skin. "If you go to the police, I will have you committed. I have the connections. I have the authority. You will be declared unfit. You will be locked away in a facility where the walls are padded and the windows don't open." He released her hand and stepped back, picking up the black notebook from the floor. He dusted it off gently. "And the children," he continued, delivering the final, fatal blow. "If you are institutionalized, I will get full custody. You will never see Leo or Maya again. I will tell them their mother went insane. I will tell them you were dangerous. And they will grow up forgetting the sound of your voice." Olivia sank to the floor, her legs giving way under the weight of his cruelty. She looked up at him, this man she had shared a bed with for 7 years, and realized she had been sleeping next to a sociopath. He had built a cage around her, bar by invisible bar, and she hadn't even heard the lock click until now. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," Daniel said, placing the book back in the safe and spinning the dial. "And because you are my wife." You play the part one wrote for you. You smile at the Gallus. You raise the children. And you look the other way. He walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. Wash your face, Olivia, he said, his voice returning to its casual, domestic tone. We have the fundraiser tomorrow night. You need to look perfect. He left her alone in the dark study. Olivia sat there for hours, the silence of the house pressing against her eardrums. She realized then that divorce was not an option. A divorce lawyer could not fight a man who owned the judge. A restraining order could not stop a man who owned the truth. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She saw a victim. She saw a woman who had been checkmated before the game even started. But as the night wore on, the sobbing stopped. The fear did not leave, but it changed. It hardened. It crystallized into something sharp and cold in the pit of her stomach. Daniel thought he had broken her. He thought he had terrified her into submission. But he had made a miscalculation. He had shown her the blueprints of his power. He had shown her that he was not a god. He was a criminal with a notebook. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stood up. If she wanted to save her children, she couldn't just leave him. She had to destroy him. She had to become someone else, someone capable of lying, of scheming, of playing a role so convincing that even the master manipulator wouldn't see the strings. She had to become the villain in her own story to be the hero in theirs. She walked out of the study, leaving the old Olivia Carter on the floor. The woman who walked down the hallway was a soldier entering enemy territory, and the war had just begun. The parking garage beneath the abandoned textile factory in Brooklyn was a subterranean world of dripping pipes and flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed with the irritating frequency of a trapped fly. It was a place where secrets came to rust, far removed from the manicured hedges and doormen of Olivia Carter's life. She sat in her car, a nondescript rental sedan she had paid for with cash, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles shone white under the dashboard lights. It had been 3 days since she found the black notebook in Daniel's safe. 3 days of playing the role of the dutiful wife, smiling over breakfast, pouring coffee, and letting Daniel kiss her cheek while her skin crawled with the knowledge of what lay beneath his touch. She needed an ally. She needed a weapon. A shadow detached itself from a concrete pillar and moved toward the car. Olivia unlocked the doors, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The passenger door opened, and a blast of cold, damp air swirled into the vehicle, bringing with it the scent of stale tobacco and rain. Ryan Mitchell slid into the seat. He looked exactly as his reputation suggested, rough, unpolished, a man who had been chewed up by the corporate media machine and spat out into the gutter of freelance obscurity. He wore a faded leather jacket and jeans that had seen better decades. He did not look at her with awe or attraction. He looked at her with the weary skepticism of a man who believed everyone was lying until proven otherwise. "You are 5 minutes late, Mrs. Brooks," Ryan said, his voice a low gravel. "I do not usually meet sources in basements. Especially not socialites who are likely wasting my time. You said you had something on the medical board?" "I have something on Daniel Brooks," Olivia said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. Ryan scoffed, reaching for the door handle. "Your husband? Look, lady, I do not do divorce cases. If he is sleeping with the nanny, call a lawyer. I am an investigative journalist, not a tabloid hack." "He is not sleeping with the nanny," Olivia said sharply, reaching into her purse. "He is killing people." Ryan froze. He turned back slowly, his eyes narrowing. Olivia pulled out a burner phone and handed it to him. On the screen was a photograph she had hurriedly taken of the page in the black notebook. The flash had caused a glare, but the handwriting was legible. "Senator Harrison. Priority status. Purchased." Ryan took the phone. The silence in the car stretched, heavy and suffocating. He zoomed in on the image, his cynical expression dissolving into one of intense, predatory focus. He scrolled, reading the data, the names, the amounts. When he finally looked up at Olivia, the annoyance was gone, replaced by a dark, electric intensity. "This is the transplant list," he whispered. "This is a federal crime. This is everything." "He keeps the physical logbook in a safe," Olivia explained, her voice steady now. "I cannot get it out yet. If I take it, he will know instantly. He will destroy the evidence, and he will destroy me. He threatened to have me institutionalized if I ever spoke up. He has the power to take my children away forever. Ryan handed the phone back to her, running a hand through his messy hair. So you want me to expose him? You want me to run the story based on the photo? No, Olivia said. A photo is not enough. He will claim it is forged. He will sue you into oblivion and bury the story. We need the book. We need the recordings he keeps of his transactions. We need irrefutable proof. So what is the plan? Ryan asked. You wear a wire? You spy on him? He watches me too closely. Olivia shook her head. He tracks my phone. He checks my odometer. If I start acting suspicious, he will lock me away before I can get close to that safe again. I need a distraction. I need a smoke screen so thick that he never looks at what I am actually doing. She took a deep breath, staring out the windshield at the gray concrete wall. I need to leave him, she said, but not as a whistleblower. I need to leave him as a cheater. Ryan frowned, confused. What? Daniel is a narcissist, Olivia said, turning to face him. His ego is his blind spot. If I leave him for another man, a man he considers beneath him, he will be so consumed by his own victimhood, so focused on painting me as the villain to the public, that he will stop watching the shadows. He will think I am just a shallow, selfish woman chasing a thrill. He will never suspect that the affair is actually an investigation. Ryan stared at her, a slow realization dawning on his face. You want to fake an affair? With me? You are perfect, Olivia said, not unkindly. You are everything he hates. You are poor. You are rugged. You are dangerous. If the world thinks I ran away with the bad boy reporter, they will crucify me. Daniel will love that. He will feel safe because he will think he has won the moral high ground. You realize what this will do to you? Ryan asked, his voice softening with a strange respect. The press will tear you apart. You will lose your job, your friends. Your reputation will be incinerated. I do not care about my reputation, Olivia said, her eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying maternal love. I care about my children. If I have to become the most hated woman in New York to save them from a monster, then I will strike the match myself. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. He saw the trembling in her hands, but he also saw the steel in her spine. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. We do it. We build the narrative. We make it loud. We make it dirty. 2 weeks later, the plan culminated in a cheap motel parking lot on the outskirts of Jersey City. The rain was pouring down in sheets, turning the world into a blur of gray and neon. Olivia stood under the awning of room 104, shivering in her trench coat. Across the street, hidden in a parked van, was a photographer Ryan had tipped off anonymously. He is in position, Ryan murmured, standing close to her. To an observer, the proximity looked intimate. In reality, he was blocking the wind for her. Are you ready? Make it look real, Olivia whispered, closing her eyes. Please. Ryan reached out and cupped her face. His hands were rough, but his touch was clinical, like a director positioning an actor. He leaned in. The kiss was not romantic. It was a collision of lips, cold and wet with rain. Olivia felt nothing but a knot of nausea in her stomach. She was betraying her vows, not in the way the world would think, but by using intimacy as a weapon of war. She thought of Leo and Maya sleeping safely in their beds. She thought of Daniel's smug smile. She forced herself to lean into Ryan, to grab the lapels of his jacket, to tilt her head so the camera would catch the perfect angle of passion. The shutter clicked in the distance, a rapid-fire sound like a silenced automatic weapon. Click, click, click. They held the pose for 10 seconds, an eternity. Then, Ryan pulled away. We got it, he said, his voice flat. Olivia stepped back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She felt dirty. She felt hollow. Now, she said, looking at the man who was now her partner in crime, we wait for the explosion. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. The fall of Mrs. Brooks. The world gasped. Daniel played the victim. And in the safety of his penthouse, the surgeon smiled, thinking he had won, unaware that the woman he had underestimated had just successfully planted the Trojan horse inside his gates. The affair was a lie. The love was a fabrication. But the war was very, very real. The countdown to the final custody hearing ticked away with the relentless, indifferent precision of a metronome. There were 48 hours left before Olivia Carter would walk into a courtroom and likely be stripped of her maternal rights forever. Daniel's legal team had been ruthless, painting a portrait of a woman unhinged by vanity and lust, a mother who had abandoned her nest to frolic in the bed of a destitute radical. The narrative was so watertight, so perfectly constructed, that even Olivia sometimes found herself questioning the reality of her own memories when she read the legal briefs. But in the cramped, shadow-filled apartment in Queens, there was no time for self-pity. The air was thick with the ozone smell of overheating electronics and the nervous energy of two people standing on the precipice of ruin. Ryan Mitchell sat hunched over his rig, his fingers flying across the keyboard, his face illuminated by the scrolling lines of code. "I have disabled the perimeter sensors," Ryan said, his voice tight. "But I can only loop the internal camera feed for 15 minutes. After that, the system resets, and if Daniel checks his phone, he will see a ghost walking through his house." Olivia stood by the door, dressed entirely in black, her hands gloved. She felt less like a thief and more like an archaeologist preparing to descend into a tomb she already knew by heart. 15 minutes is all I need," she said, though her stomach churned with a nausea that had become her constant companion. "He is in surgery, a triple bypass on a VIP client. He won't be out for another 3 hours. Arrogance makes people careless, but paranoia makes them lucky," Ryan warned, turning to look at her. "If you get caught inside, it is over. Not just the story, the kids, everything." "I know," she whispered. She didn't need the reminder. The stakes were etched into the lining of her soul. The journey back to the Upper East Side felt like traveling through time. As Olivia approached the service entrance of the building, the code for which she had memorized from years of letting caterers and housekeepers in, she felt a phantom limb sensation. This was her home. Her children were sleeping 5 floors up. And yet, she was an intruder, a virus trying to breach the host body. The service elevator smelled of industrial cleaner. When the doors opened into the penthouse's utility room, silence hit her like a physical blow. It was the same oppressive, curated silence she had fled months ago. She stepped into the hallway, her soft-soled boots making no sound on the hardwood. The penthouse had changed. It was subtle, but terrifying. The photographs on the walls, the ones that used to feature the 4 of them, had been replaced. Now, they were portraits of just Daniel and the children. Professional, black-and-white shots where Daniel looked like a benevolent god protecting his offspring. Olivia had been surgically removed from the visual history of the family. It was a Stalinist erasure, chilling in its thoroughness. She moved quickly past the children's rooms. The doors were closed. She paused for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering over the knob of Leo's door. The urge to open it, to smell his hair, to kiss his forehead, was a gravitational pull so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. But she knew that if she went in, she would never leave. She swallowed the sob rising in her throat and forced herself to keep moving toward the study. The study was dark, the heavy velvet drapes drawn against the city lights. It smelled of Daniel, sandalwood, old paper, and the metallic tang of expensive scotch. Olivia went straight to the painting of the stormy seascape that hung behind the desk. Her hands trembled as she swung the frame away to reveal the wall safe. She stared at the digital keypad. This was the gamble. Ryan had run algorithms, trying to crack Daniel's passwords, but Olivia had insisted she knew the code. Daniel was a creature of ego. He wouldn't choose a random number. He would choose a number that celebrated his own triumphs. She typed in the date he had been named chief of surgery. Error. The red light blinked, a mocking eye in the darkness. Olivia's heart stopped. She wiped her damp palms on her pants. He had changed it. Of course he had changed it. Panic began to claw at her throat. Think, she hissed to herself. Think like him. What was more important to Daniel than his career? His control. The moment he truly felt he owned her. She thought back to the night in the kitchen, the night she found the notebook, the night he threatened to institutionalize her. The date was burned into her mind. August 14th. But 4 digits were not enough. He needed 6. She added the year. She pressed the pound key. The mechanism whirred, a mechanical sigh of surrender. The light turned green. Olivia nearly collapsed with relief. She pulled the heavy steel door open. It was there. The black notebook. It sat on top of a stack of cash, exactly where she had last seen it. It was the anchor of his power and the instrument of his destruction. She reached in and grabbed it. It felt heavy, vibrating with the lives it had stolen. She also grabbed a small digital voice recorder that sat next to it, Daniel's insurance policy, where he recorded his blackmail meetings. Got it, she whispered into the tiny microphone hidden in her collar. Get out, Ryan's voice crackled in her ear. Now, the system is glitching. The loop is breaking. Olivia shoved the items into her bag and swung the safe door closed. She reset the painting. She turned to leave, but as she stepped into the hallway, the house suddenly came alive. Beep, beep, beep. The keypad by the front door began to chirp. The security system was re-engaging early. At the hospital, miles away, Daniel Brooks was peeling off his latex gloves. The surgery had been a masterpiece. He felt the rush of endorphins that came with playing God. He walked over to his locker and checked his phone. A notification from the Penthouse security app, system reset. Motion detected in hallway B. Daniel frowned. Hallway B was outside the study. The nanny and children were at the park. He had sent them there himself to keep the house quiet for his return. He tapped the screen to view the live feed. For a moment, the screen was black, buffering. Then, a grainy image appeared. The hallway was empty. But Daniel Brooks did not believe in ghosts, and he did not believe in glitches. He stared at the screen, zooming in. There, on the polished floor, was a faint, wet footprint. It was small, a woman's size. His blood ran cold. He didn't call the police. The police asked questions. He called his private security detail. Go to the penthouse, he ordered, his voice low and lethal. Someone is inside. Do not let them leave. Back in the apartment, Olivia heard the elevator hum. The private elevator, the one that opened directly into the foyer. It wasn't the police. It was Daniel's men. She knew his security team. They were ex-military, paid to be brutal. Ryan, she gasped, backing away from the foyer. They are here. The service stairs. Ryan shouted in her ear. Go to the roof. I am pulling the car around to the alley, but you have to get down the fire escape. Olivia turned and ran. She burst through the utility door just as the main elevator chimed. She didn't look back. She scrambled up the concrete stairs to the roof, her breath tearing at her lungs. She pushed open the heavy steel door and spilled out onto the roof of the building, the cold wind whipping her hair across her face. Below her, the city sprawled like a glittery, indifferent beast. Behind her, she heard the heavy boots of men taking the stairs 2 at a time. She had the evidence. She had the truth. But as she looked over the edge at the dizzying drop to the alley below, she realized that possessing the truth and surviving to tell it were 2 very different things. She swung her leg over the parapet, her grip on the frozen metal ladder tightening, and began the descent into the darkness, leaving the gilded cage of her marriage behind for the final time. The courtroom of the New York State Supreme Court was a cavern of polished mahogany and suffocating silence, designed to make human beings feel small against the weight of the law. The air was stale, recycled through vents that hummed with a low, monotonous drone, vibrating against the ribs of everyone in the gallery. To Olivia Carter, sitting alone at the defendant's table, the room felt less like a hall of justice and more like an operating theater where she was about to be vivisected without anesthesia. She kept her head bowed, staring at her hands folded in her lap. They were trembling, a subtle tremor she tried to hide by clasping her fingers together until the knuckles turned the color of old bone. She could feel the eyes of the spectators boring into her back, the burning, judgmental gaze of a public that had already convicted her in the court of opinion. To them, she was the runaway mother, the woman who had traded her children for a sordid fling in a motel room. Across the aisle, Daniel Brooks sat with the stillness of a predator that had already cornered its prey. He looked impeccable. His suit was a charcoal gray that signaled gravitas, his tie a somber blue. He did not look angry. He looked devastated. He periodically removed his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose, a calculated gesture of exhaustion that elicited sympathetic murmurs from the gallery. He was playing the role of the grieving husband with a virtuosity that made Olivia's stomach churn. "Your Honor," Daniel's attorney, a man with a voice like a serrated knife, paced in front of the judge. "We are not here merely to discuss custody. We are here to discuss character." Ms. Carter abandoned her children. She left the marital home without notice, cutting off communication for weeks, to engage in a reckless, unstable lifestyle with a man who has no fixed address and a history of unemployment. She has proven, through her own actions, that her priority is her own hedonistic desires, not the welfare of Leo and Maya. Every word was a lash. Olivia flinched, but she did not speak. She had to let them paint her as the villain. She had to let the trap snap shut so completely that Daniel would forget to watch his own feet. Daniel glanced at her. His eyes were cold, dead things behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He offered her a small, sad smile, a smile that said, "I win." He leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something, likely a suggestion to bring up her mental health history, the fictitious narrative he had planted in her medical files. "We ask for full, sole custody," the lawyer concluded, slamming a file onto the table for dramatic effect, "and a permanent restraining order to protect the children from the emotional volatility of their mother and her." Paramore. The judge, a stern woman with a face etched by years of listening to lies, turned her gaze to Olivia. "Does the defense wish to call a witness?" Olivia's lawyer, a public defender who looked overworked but possessed a sharpness in her eyes that Daniel had underestimated, stood up. She did not deliver a speech. She simply adjusted her collar and spoke two words that changed the temperature of the room. "Ryan Mitchell." A ripple of shock went through the gallery. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Daniel stiffened slightly. This was the lover, the dirtbag. Daniel expected a man in flannel, smelling of cigarettes, who would crumble under cross-examination and prove Olivia's poor judgment. The side door opened. Ryan walked in. He was not the man from the paparazzi photos. He was clean-shaven, wearing a sharp navy suit that fit him perfectly. He carried a leather briefcase, not a duffel bag. He walked to the stand with a purposeful stride, his eyes locking onto Daniel's for a brief, electric second before he took his seat. Daniel frowned. This was not the script he had written. "Mr. Mitchell," Olivia's lawyer began, standing in the center of the room. "The petitioner has described you as Ms. Carter's lover, a man with whom she fled her family. Is that correct?" Ryan placed his hands on the railing of the witness box. He spoke clearly, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "No, it is not." "Then how would you describe your relationship with the defendant?" "Olivia Carter is not my girlfriend," Ryan said, his gaze shifting to the judge. "She is my confidential informant." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath. Daniel's face drained of color. He sat up straighter, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Objection," Daniel's lawyer barked, standing up. "Relevance? This is a custody hearing, not a overruled," the judge said, leaning forward, her interest piqued. "Continue." "Informant?" the lawyer asked. "For what purpose?" Ryan opened his briefcase. The sound of the latches clicking echoed like gunshots. He pulled out a thick, black notebook, the very book Olivia had stolen from the safe. He held it up. "I am an investigative journalist specializing in medical fraud," Ryan stated, his voice turning hard. "For the past 6 months, Ms. Carter has been working undercover to gather evidence regarding a criminal enterprise run by her husband, Dr. Daniel Brooks." "This is absurd." Daniel stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His mask of the grieving husband shattered, revealing the snarling narcissist beneath. "That man is a liar. That book is stolen property." "Sit down, Dr. Brooks," the judge ordered, banging her gavel, "or you will be held in contempt." Ryan did not flinch. He turned to the notebook. "This ledger details the illegal sale of human organs," he read, his voice steady and damning. "It contains names, dates, and payments. It shows how Dr. Brooks falsified national transplant wait lists, accepting bribes to prioritize wealthy donors over dying patients. Ms. Carter did not leave her children because she didn't love them. She removed herself from the home to draw Dr. Brooks's attention away from the evidence and to protect the children from a man she discovered was a sociopath. The gallery erupted. The reporters were typing furiously on their phones. The narrative of the cheating wife was incinerating in real time, replaced by the terrifying image of the surgeon of death. Lies, Daniel hissed, his hands shaking. She is crazy. I have the files. She is unstable. We also have audio, Ryan said, cutting through Daniel's panic. He pulled a small digital drive from the bag and handed it to the bailiff. Recorded 3 days ago in the penthouse safe room. The lawyer nodded to the clerk. A moment later, the audio played over the courtroom speakers. The quality was crystal clear. If you go to the police, I will have you committed. You will never see Leo or Maya again. It is the cost of greatness, Olivia. Do you think they will believe a neurotic housewife over the chief of surgery? It was Daniel's voice. Arrogant, cold, cruel. Olivia lifted her head for the first time. She looked at Daniel. He was no longer looking at the judge. He was looking at the door, measuring the distance, realizing the walls were closing in. The man who played God was suddenly very, very mortal. This court is now in recess, the judge announced, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Bailiff, secure the doors. No one leaves. And call the district attorney's office. Immediately. As the gavel came down, the sound was not just a judicial punctuation. It was the sound of Daniel Brooks's life ending. The police officers at the back of the room began to move forward, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. Olivia let out a breath she felt she had been holding for years. She looked at Ryan, who gave her a small, solemn nod. They hadn't just won custody. They had nuked the battlefield. The chaos that erupted in the courtroom was not the frantic, noisy disorder of a riot, but the heavy, seismic shifting of a world tilting on its axis. As the judge's gavel struck the wood, it sounded like the final nail being driven into the coffin of Daniel Brooks's carefully curated existence. The bailiffs moved with a synchronized efficiency, flanking the man who had once walked these halls as if he owned the very air within them. Daniel did not scream. He did not fight. As the officers pulled his arms behind his back, he stood with a rigid, unnatural stiffness, his face drained of all color, resembling one of the marble statues that adorned the courthouse lobby. The click of the handcuffs was a sharp, metallic bite that cut through the murmurs of the gallery, a sound far more final than the locking of a safe door. It was the sound of absolute containment. Olivia watched him. She expected to feel a surge of triumph, a rush of vindictive joy at seeing the monster caged. But as Daniel turned his head, his eyes meeting hers one last time, she felt only a profound, exhausting emptiness. There was no apology in his gaze, only a cold, bewildered hatred. He looked at her as if she were a tool that had malfunctioned, a scalpel that had cut the surgeon's hand. He could not comprehend that the woman he had deemed weak, the wife he had molded into a silent accessory, had been the one to dismantle his empire brick by brick. Mrs. Brooks, a police officer said gently, stepping between her and the sight of her husband being led away. We need to take your statement. And the Child Protective Services agent is bringing your children to the family waiting room. The mention of the children snapped the tether of her trance. The courtroom, the reporters shouting questions, the flashbulbs popping like distant lightning, it all faded into background noise. The only reality that mattered was waiting behind a beige door down the hall. Ryan Mitchell stood beside her as they navigated the throng of media outside the courtroom doors. He did not hold her hand. He walked with his shoulder brushing hers, a solid, protective presence that required no physical intimacy to be felt. He was the soldier who had walked through the fire with her, and now that they had reached the other side, the dynamic between them shifted from urgency to a quiet, mutual respect. You did it, Ryan said softly, his voice barely audible over the din of questions. Mrs. Brooks, was the affair staged? Dr. Brooks, did you sell organs? We did it. Olivia corrected him, keeping her head high, her sunglasses shielding her eyes not from the sun, but from the judgment she no longer feared. The family waiting room was quiet, smelling of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. It was a purgatory for broken families, filled with mismatched toys and old magazines. Olivia stood in the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs with a force that made her breath hitch. Leo and Maya were sitting on a small, vinyl sofa. They looked small, fragile, and terrified. A social worker was kneeling in front of them, speaking in hushed tones. When Olivia stepped into the room, the air seemed to leave it. "Mommy," Maya whispered. The word was tentative, a question rather than a greeting. Olivia dropped to her knees, disregarding the hard floor, opening her arms but not forcing them to come. She knew the poison Daniel had dripped into their ears. She knew they had been told she abandoned them, that she didn't love them, that she was sick. "I am here, baby," Olivia choked out, tears finally spilling over, hot and cleansing. "I am here. I never wanted to leave. I had to go to make sure you were safe." Maya ran. She hit Olivia's chest with the force of a cannonball, burying her face in Olivia's neck, sobbing with a desperation that broke Olivia's heart and mended it all at once. Olivia held her daughter, rocking her back and forth, inhaling the scent of her shampoo, a scent she had feared she would never smell again. But Leo did not move. He sat on the sofa, his legs swinging, his hands gripping the edge of the cushion. He was 6 years old, but his eyes held the weary cynicism of a much older man, Daniel's eyes. He looked at his mother with suspicion. "Daddy said you chose a new boyfriend," Leo said, his voice trembling. "Daddy said you didn't want to be our mommy anymore." The knife twisted in Olivia's gut. This was the true crime Daniel had committed. The theft of organs was heinous, but the theft of a child's trust was a spiritual murder. Olivia gently loosened her hold on Maya and shuffled forward on her knees until she was eye level with her son. She did not touch him. She waited. "Daddy was sick, Leo," Olivia said, her voice steady and honest. She would not lie to him. The era of lies was over. He did bad things. He hurt people. And he told you stories because he was afraid I would stop him. I didn't leave because I wanted a boyfriend. I left to find the policeman who could help us. I left to save you." She gestured to the door, where Ryan was standing, watching silently. "That man isn't my boyfriend," Olivia said. "He is my friend who helped me fight the bad guys. Like in your comic books." Leo looked at Ryan, then back at Olivia. He searched her face, looking for the deception he had been trained to expect. But he saw only the raw, unfiltered love of a mother who had walked through hell to get back to him. The tension in his small shoulders broke. His lip quivered. "Can we go home?" Leo asked, his voice cracking. "Not the penthouse. I don't like it there. It's cold." "No." Olivia smiled through her tears, reaching out and finally taking his small, cold hand in hers. "We are never going back there. We are going to find a new home. A warm one." Leo slid off the couch and collapsed into her arms. Olivia held them both, the weight of their bodies grounding her to the earth. She was no longer the socialite, the editor, or the wife. She was simply the shelter. An hour later, outside the back entrance of the courthouse, away from the prying eyes of the press, Olivia stood by a waiting taxi. The children were already inside, buckled up, watching cartoons on a phone. Ryan stood on the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets. The adrenaline of the chase had faded, leaving behind the awkward reality of two people who had shared a bed but never a romance. "So," Ryan said, kicking at a crack in the pavement, "the DA wants me to testify at the grand jury next week. I'll be busy." "You got your story," Olivia said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "The scoop of the century. The surgeon of death." "I did," Ryan nodded. He looked at her, his expression softening. "But you know, the headline isn't going to be about him. It's going to be about you. The mother who burned down her life to save her children." "I don't need headlines, Ryan," Olivia said. "I just need quiet. I need to learn how to make peanut butter sandwiches again without looking over my shoulder." Ryan stepped closer and extended his hand. It was a formal gesture, but when Olivia took it, she squeezed it with a strength that conveyed everything she couldn't say. "Thank you. You saved my life. Take care of them, Olivia, Ryan said. Take care of the truth, Ryan, she replied. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the gray rhythm of the New York streets, a lone wolf returning to the hunt. Olivia watched him go, feeling a pang of gratitude, but no regret. They were two ships that had collided in a storm, lashed together for survival, and now, as the waters calmed, they drifted to their separate horizons. Olivia climbed into the taxi. Where to, ma'am? The driver asked. She looked at Leo and Maya in the back seat. They were asleep, their heads leaning against each other. They looked peaceful. Just drive? Olivia said, leaning her head back against the seat and closing her eyes. Take us somewhere quiet. Take us somewhere new. As the car pulled away, merging into the stream of traffic, the skyline of Manhattan loomed in the distance. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, the penthouse stood empty, a monument to a lie. But here, in the moving car, surrounded by the breathing of her children, Olivia felt the first true beat of her own heart in years. She had lost her marriage. She had lost her status. She had lost her reputation. But as she reached back and lightly touched her daughter's hand, she knew she had won the only thing that mattered. She had chosen the fire, and she had walked out of it holding the future. The ending shocked everyone, the papers would say. But to Olivia, it wasn't a shock. It was simply the inevitable result of a mother's love, a force far more precise and far more dangerous than any surgeon's blade.